I'm running this basically really informal event. I am honestly a bid writer. I've done Arts Council applications. I've done project work, developing your creative practice, culture recovery fund. If you're coming in, just put yourself on mute because it's not doing it automatically. Just so there's no background noise and different things. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm not the Arts Council. I am somebody who's done a lot of the applications. That's reading the guidance, reading the strategies, reading what the Arts Council have put out there, and then hoping that I can make it relevant, interesting, accessible, applicable to individual artists and to those that run really small arts organisations, because those are the people that I've spent the last 6-7 years writing grants for. So that's kind of who I have in my mind whenever I read all of this guidance. So I may say things a bit wrong, I may say things that you disagree with, that's totally fine. Like, this is my interpretation essentially. The aims of the session I've got, so this took me absolutely ages to prepare for, because actually as I started to delve into each different aspect of it, it was this huge spider's web that encompassed loads and loads of different guidance parts and strategies and plans and different things. So I've got an extremely boring slideshow to share with you. So I'm going to start doing that now, but at least it gives you something to focus on rather than just looking at me all the time. So here we go. Let's have a look, and it should now be sharing my screen. So New Arts Council project grants. The aim of bringing you all here today is to give individual artists and small organisations a place to understand the requirements of the new form. That's particularly the outcomes and the investment principles, because that's what's completely different from what we might have been doing before. And also to empower you to start to think about setting out your own aims and targets that will particularly help you with the investment principles. And as you look to apply those into project grant applications. So people coming into this session, you're going to have really different experience of project grants. You might have made loads of applications before, you might have been funded before, or you might never have made an application. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to cover all of the ground that we need to, but because it is so complex, I'm really seeing this as the beginning of a conversation, and I'll share my email address on the final slide. So anybody that wants to get and have a bit more in-depth conversation about your stuff, then feel free. It will very much be me talking with some time for questions and answers. There won't be breakout rooms, etc. Kind of like going into plans. If you've just come in, can you pop yourself on mute, because I've got some background noise just coming through, so if you could just do that would be amazing. So do sort of flag up on the chat, or raise the hand button if you don't understand the language used. I really want to use this to demystify some terms and jargon, rather than covering in-depth detail of like what to answer in each box, etc. But I've kind of lived and breathed this language almost daily, so it's really easy for me to forget what's really difficult to understand when you're just coming to it. I'm going to skim over some really crucial and detailed bits of information, like the creative case for diversity, because I could spend a whole hour just on that. But what I want to do is just provide you with the links and provide you with the context of where these thoughts are coming from. I want to share all the links with you and kind of just give you a big information overload, because each of these strategies, goals, delivery plans, breakdowns has got absolutely crucial information embedded within about how to make your application stand out within the funding meetings. The more you can quote from the strategies and plans and evidence of how you meet the vision in that application, the higher you score and the more likely you are to be funded. It's not about changing your project to fit in with the ideas in the strategy. It will already be there. You just need to shout about the right things and think about how you're talking about your project. So the Let's Create strategy, I'm not going to go through it. I'm not going to talk about all the different aspects of it. There's the link to have a read through. It's a huge document. I guess I would say, if you've never made an application to the Arts Council before, sit down with a cup of tea, 15, 20 minutes, read Let's Create. If it doesn't excite you, if you're not thinking like, this is amazing, I love the way that they're talking about this, it's possible the Arts Council is not right for you. But most people who are making art, they'll sit down and they'll go, oh, I love that bit, I love that bit, I love that bit. And you start to understand how you fit into it as a, you know, an artist that could get the funding. So they've then broken down that 10-year big vision and strategy into a delivery plan specifically for 2021 to 2024. And within this, there's more detail about some of the steps and about some of the ways that you can kind of align it with. Oh, are people saying that it's a bit tricky to hear? Maybe if I stop sharing for a little bit and I just go for a bit. It's fine. Mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. It's going in and out a little. Better after you said people can mute. Okay, great. So again, there's a link for the delivery plan. I'm just going to move over my notes here. I've pulled out some key things. You can go through the whole delivery plan, obviously, but I've picked out some key things. This is where you can access it. The things to think about for your application that the Arts Council are really looking to do is to help artists recover from COVID. You know, using these 3 years to go, this was had a huge impact on the industry. The more that you can talk about how your project is going to help you and the sector and audiences recover from that period, the more that will align with what they want in their delivery plan. Also, they talk about government priorities and levelling up and everything around that. So that's something to consider. And developing the cultural industry. So there's more involvement of museums and libraries. So if you're thinking of a project that you might want to take around libraries or museums, that's really good in terms of, you know, what they're looking to see. The massive one, I think that would be relevant for lots of people here, so put a massive bold and put some of their language in, is that they want to provide greater support for individuals. So they're looking at that kind of balance of the funding that they award, and that's going to be a really big priority for them. Increase financial support for individual creative practitioners, first-time funding recipients. So really, we'll talk about this a bit later in the investment principles, really worth talking about what will that funding mean for you when you receive it for the first time, because it's such a big change within your artistic practice, if that's relevant to you. But they're also going to be looking at that demographic data. So it's worth building that in and sharing that and talking about what that means for you as an individual artist. I'm not going to go into the equality objectives massively. I'm just going to put those there because I'll share all the slides and everything afterwards, and you can go through, but be thinking about, okay, well, again, these are some main objectives of things that they want to fund. This is about audiences. This is about the workforce and the artists. All of those bits going into it. Okay, again, this is what I discovered last night within the delivery plan. This is really, really important if you are planning a project in any of these places. These are the priority places. for the Arts Council for their delivery plan. They've hit on these through a kind of cross-section of different data, where funding has gone from them in the past, deprivation statistics, poverty, just the kind of balance across the country. These are the places that are really not getting that kind of subsidised culture. So if you are planning a project in any of these places, it's worth really shouting about. It's worth really like getting to know your data from those places. What is the impact and what is the benefit going to be for the people there? So again, I've popped that on the slide so that you can kind of consider in a bit more depth. Okay, let's look really briefly at the old and new format comparison. This is not mine. This is Christina Poulton from Striker Light. She created this absolutely amazing resource, and that's the link where you can access it. But let me just go into. I'm going to stop the share and then no, I can't come out. Ooh, can't come out with this. Ooh. Oh, there we go. It keeps coming back to my oh, here we go. I'm going to go out. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen again. There, right, so you should be seeing it, not the presentation. Again, I'm going to go through this really quickly, just aware of time. So this is a comparison for people who are familiar with the old application, different aspects that are the same. And I just want to point out for you, we're not going to talk about any of these beginning things. What Christina has done is sort of put the old one here and the new one here side by side in a table, and she's made a comparison of what's different and what's the same. So this is really, really useful to go through in your own time, and we'll talk about it. She's grayed out the boxes where that now doesn't appear anymore. You don't tick that box, so you don't answer that question. The format is somehow different. So you can see at the beginning, it's pretty much the same, slightly different phrasing. And then as you go down, again, different phrasing, but similar questions. The whole public engagement section is completely changed. That's totally grayed out in this new application. And then there's some more sort of tick boxes about kind of what your event is. If I scroll down, what we're going to do is talk about let's create outcomes and the let's create investment principles, because as you can see, that's totally grayed out for the old application. They were not there at all before. This is a completely new part of the form. So let me switch back. I did a screenshot. Again, I'll share this with you afterwards, of the Arts Council breakdown in another webinar talking about the MPOs, because I just thought it was really interesting to see how they bullet pointed each of the let's create outcomes. So in the new form, you will be talking about your project within each of these outcomes. So the outcomes are very much like what you deliver, the change that your project is going to make in the world. What is the outside outcomes, the outside results for your audiences, for your workforce, for your participants. So again, not expecting you to kind of like read through this really quickly now, but that will be useful for you to have a look at kind of after the session. The application provides 3 separate boxes which address each outcome separately. So it's important to get to grips with understanding the difference, but it's also important to see where there's some crossover, which is obviously a contradiction in terms, but the guidance notes, they don't break down the prompts into different sections. They allow for crossover. They allow for kind of like a little bit of merging between these. You don't need to, you can kind of understand the different strands, but they all interrelate and they all move together. So it's like the whole kind of, I'm feeling sort of push of this new format is away from a kind of a linear thinking about your project and a more holistic, a more strategic, a more interconnected look at your project. Obviously that's a really complex idea. What I've done is thought of an entirely fictional project based on common themes and ideas from artists that I've worked with over the years. So I'm going to introduce you now to Jane. This is Jane. She's very happy and lovely and smiley. She's very excited, obviously, about the new project grants format, and she's decided that she wants to make her first application to project grants. She's an individual artist, so I'm going to give you her fictional story here as like a case study. So individual theatre artist Jane wants to make her first application to project grants. She has recently had some significant success with a solo show at a fringe festival with great reviews and an award. She now wants to create a new project, working with a theatre venue contact she made at the festival. They've pledged her some rehearsal development space for free. The theatre is in the New Forest in the southwest. Jane wants to work with a theatre designer and a puppet maker for the first time. Her piece has got significance for community groups living locally to the theatre. She wants to work with about 30 participants involved in the R&D, the new R&D. And this R&D will end with a work in progress showing. Jane is interested in setting up a theatre company, but she doesn't know how to go about it or what that might mean for her future career. She's interested in connecting with the wider arts industry around her, but finds it difficult to see a route in. If you've just come in and joined us, please do pop yourself on mute because there's just a little bit of background noise coming through. So that's how I'm going to talk about creative people, cultural communities, and the others. So I've broken down the Arts Council breakdown even more, just to pull out those few ideas. CYP is children and young people. Sorry to put a kind of big acronym in there. And that is kind of what people are looking at in the creative people strand. So I'll let you read through those in your own time. What I thought I would do would be give you an example of how Jane would answer the question of how her project is going to meet the creative people outcome. So for example, Jane is working with small groups to provide an impactful engagement with her project, which means something that's going to be really worth doing for those participants that will have a good meaning in their life. Jane will explain in this box how her project works with these communities, maybe talking about different community groups, that she will work to involve them in her research and development so the impact is greater. Potentially she's going to write about that they're going to get involved in making puppets for the show as well as theatre and discussion workshops. So she's going to really describe there what's going to happen for these people. She's inspired, you know, that top line, she's inspiring them to be creative, but they're from all walks of life. She could specifically mention if she wants her R&D, her research and development, to involve early years children, primary school children, secondary school children, and if these are inside or outside of school. So those would be some things to kind of think about when you were answering this question. Where are people, where are they in the community, and describe the impact on them. The next one, cultural communities. So this is where the place-based partnerships and those priority places that I mentioned earlier come into play. So if you were going to be working in any of those places, but you can also just read through those really truncated bullet points that I've whacked in there about what do the Arts Council mean when they say cultural communities. Economic impact on the local area is always really interesting to me, in terms of kind of talking about, well, if you bring an arts event to the area, you're kind of bringing people together and they're spending money, and it benefits the local businesses and different stuff you can talk about, all of that bit. So if we think back to Jane and her new R&D project, she's going to talk about working in the New Forest, because she's noticed that that's a priority place, and do some research on statistics around arts engagement in the New Forest, but also specific community needs there. She will improve well-being through the culture, and she's also looking into improving access, and the theatre is going to help her to do that. So that's kind of what she's going to talk about answering this question. And then here is, there's a bit of crossover you can see starting to come in, because she's described the workshops before, what that's going to mean for individuals, and now she's going to talk about it more on a kind of a community level, and what the social impact is going to be. And the third one down there, where I put cultural engagement equals social benefit, that's a kind of given that the Arts Council have given you, that when cultural engagement happens, social benefit happens. So you can always talk about your project in those ways. What else is Jane going to do? Yeah, a sense of place and community could enter into Jane's final piece, because people have given their thoughts of living in that place. How are we doing for time? We're all right, half an hour. Creative and cultural country. So again, have a little read through those bits that I've pulled out in your own time. This is about the industry. This is about kind of the arts industry, talking to them, providing resources for them. What does this project bring that will kind of help others within the workforce of the cultural industries. So for Jane, she's going to explore new ways of reaching participants and audiences in this new place to create her work. And again, that's going to be guided by the theatre venue collaborating with other cultural organisations. She'll put a bit of detail here about what she's researching and what she's developing, new types of creative practice for her, the puppetry. That's the kind of thing that you used to put in the old develop, what will develop your practice about this project. So you can bring in a bit of that here. And she can talk about it being a crucial opportunity to sustain her career and her developing success. It may be that Jane is from an underrepresented group herself within the arts, or within the arts in the Southwest. So she could talk about that a bit here, how funding her would improve that picture for everybody. So those are the outcomes, very interconnected, very interrelated. The answers might feed into each other a little bit. Then contrasted with the investment principles. That's the next section of the form. Everybody needs to address inclusivity and relevance. The other 3 are optional, but I would think carefully about, you know, do you have something to say about them? Chances are that you do. It's better to include more information, give yourself more word count to talk about your project than going, oh, if I don't have to answer them, then I won't answer them. Because, you know, where the project has gone a bit non-linear, you don't, this is really where you're going to get into the meat of convincing them that it's an amazing project to fund. Yeah, so basically this is now about you and your company, or you as an individual artist. So you go more in depth into your project and reveal the motivations behind doing what you're planning to do. It's very much about goals and targets. It's very much about expressing why you're planning to do the project in the way that you're planning to do it. It's not so much about picking and choosing the bits of Let's Create that really excite you. It's about making the case really strongly that your project addresses these principles. The old setup where you had one box to talk about your evaluation, that now is peppered through all 4 of these. So you're going to be thinking about goals, you're going to be thinking about targets, you're going to think about how are you going to quantify things and measure them throughout your project, so that when you're evaluating it, it's not just, oh, we hope to be a bit better with the environment. It's like, okay, well, we need to measure our carbon output so that we can then in the next project go to reducing that or offsetting it, or different things. So what I'll talk through that a little bit with Jane as the example, but it isn't about being woolly and just sort of saying, oh, we're going to be inclusive. It's like making some targets there. I think someone's unmuted because I get a little bit of background noise coming through again, so just check that you're all on mute. Okay, my notes are now in a different order to what I've put on the screen, which is really helpful. So let's go for inclusivity and relevance first. So in a way, this is the public engagement section as it was, but it's very different because you need to think about 3 different aspects when you answer inclusivity and relevance. Communities is the first heading that they give you. And that is, tell us who you want to reach with this project, how you've identified them, and how they've been involved in the planning or creative process. So that's where you'll put in demographic information. You know, I'm going to reach men aged 40 to 50 that live in London, you know, really kind of like break down who these people are. Tell us about the steps you take to make sure that's open, accessible to the people within the communities you plan to work with. Workforce, you need to talk about how you're reflecting the communities you wish to reach, and making sure access to opportunities is open, accessible for anybody that's coming in that you're employing on a freelance basis or an employed basis. And you need to also address the creative case for diversity, which I will send the link for you to read through in your own time, because we just don't have time to go into it here. So let's talk about Jane. So Jane, when she was talking about inclusivity and relevance, she will name specific community groups. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen here because it is just that one slide. And it might be a bit more interesting for you to see me talking. So Jane would name specific community groups, how she is in contact with them, their support for the project, maybe some support in kind that she's getting from them. Jane will describe the research and development audiences, plus any audiences she aims to reach in the future as the piece develops, if she wants to take it touring or to another place in the country maybe. She's going to talk about involving the community in the planning process already. Maybe she can name some leaders of community groups and quote from some conversations that she's had with them, why they think that her project would be really useful to be part of. She needs to consider the accessibility. It could be that she's working with a group that has some particular access needs, or she's just going to generally think about how she's framing it and how it's going to be accessible. Are the workshops going to be free? Are they going to, you know, she can ask people to pay a little bit for them, that kind of stuff. Jane will describe her approach to recruiting the theatre designer and the puppet maker, thinking about reflecting the community that she wants to reach in there. And I've just put, she'll explore the creative case for diversity, however that is relevant to her. Maybe that theatre has never had a female theatre artist working there before, something like that. Obviously that's quite an extreme example, but she will build into that. So yeah, it's really prescriptive. Go back to the big long document, the big long project grants guidance, and they've broken it all down in there. So it's really about like making the argument, you know, okay, I'm going to reach these people, but I've thought about it. I've thought about the barriers that they might face. I've thought about kind of how to get them in the room and how to make it the best experience for them. That's kind of what you need to put in there. Again, environmental. So you tick the box, up will pop the box saying that how are you going to embed environmental responsibility into your project? There are obviously a bit of a challenge around this area for individual artists or small organisations in terms of kind of understanding what can happen, understanding the kinds of decisions you might make that might make an impact. I would suggest the first couple of applications, it's about setting goals and targets and aims and assessing then how your project meets them. If you want to go all out and be a really environmentally responsible company, maybe it's about taking certain steps at a time and thinking about how that really influences your art making. But to begin with, I think it's like just understanding, you know, if you all travel on the train versus traveling in the car, what is the impact of that? Yes, someone's just put in the chat the Theatre Green Book, which I was gonna talk about as well. So that's a definitely have a look at that. Is the link gone into the chat for that? Oh, I'm having problems with my. Oh, there we go. Ah, it keeps coming up when I'm on this. There we go. Yeah, so the Theatre Green Book, I think one is sustainable productions. Is a really, really good tool because they've laid out some different goals and different things. Oh, thanks, Cassie. Yeah. So the link's just gone in the chat for that. So have a look at it. So go back to I'm not going to tell you now the Arts Council prompts, go back to the guidance and read through the prompts. There are 3 separate prompts that you need to answer for environmental responsibility. So what Jane has written in her application is she's planning to keep her environmental impact proportional to the scale of her activity. As her first funded project, this is the perfect start to understanding what impact the work might be. She cites some data from the Theatre Green Book from Sustainable Productions as a source. She will measure the impact of travel on her project, working out emissions for the creative team, participants and audience to access her project. By the end of the project, she'll have a benchmark figure. She'll gather that from some feedback surveys, how people have travelled to her events. And from this, she can calculate the emissions. She will then set a target for carbon offsetting activities for future projects. She wants to develop her knowledge of sustainable touring, so she will attend an online workshop advising on this as part of the project and talk about that there. So that's the kind of thing. Remember, right at the beginning, we were talking about what's in the delivery plan. The Arts Council is aligning with the government's ideas, all this stuff around like being neutral by 2050, all the stuff that's just come up around the COP26. So there's lots and lots that you can dig into, and it's just about going, okay, if I'm going to get this subsidy, I need to be embedding those ideas and those goals in as well. Okay, dynamism. Dynamism, I think, is the one that is the most like immediately confusing title for me anyway. What does that mean? I, in my reading, have taken it to mean that it's a lot about how your individual practice or how your organization adapts and changes and tries out new ideas, particularly around governance and finance. And also within kind of data. So all of those things that you might be responsible for when managing a project and managing a small organization. So I've put stuff in here, if you remember, in her fictional chat through of her project, Jane was interested in maybe setting up a theatre company. So that's what I've kind of run with here in terms of dynamism. Again, go back to that, the full breakdown, because they've got 3 prompts: the way you work. So this is to do with business models. This is to do with, you know, like how much money is coming from subsidy, how much from tickets, how much from donations, developing people. So like training and skills, who you bring on board, making sure you've got a good balance in your project, technology and data. So you might be using some kind of innovative new technology or data, or not even innovative and new. It might be MailChimp, mailing list, but talk about how you're using data and how you're understanding audience data. Yeah, so there's some crossover here for Jane with other principles. As it's her first application, it's worth discussing the change that subsidy will bring to a business model now and in the future. Does it open up new opportunities and different things for Jane? Skills and knowledge. She's getting advice on setting up a company as part of this project. She wants to put a new governance structure in place. This is where she'll talk about it. She knows that she can choose between a few different options. She doesn't know what they are now, but she's got the right people on board to be able to go through that. She's thinking maybe she's going to formalise as a sole trader. She's looking at different non-profit structures, or maybe just a community group structure with a membership based on those groups that she meets in the New Forest. So she can discuss a little bit about different pathways or what might be the different impacts of going with different things. So she doesn't need to have necessarily made a decision, but she's showing that she understands the impact of different decisions she might make. She's also going to touch briefly on audience data. She'll collect this with the feedback form. She'll talk with the theatre about sharing postcode data and that kind of stuff, and just kind of building the resources that she has to talk with her audience. So that's my understanding of dynamism. And then the final one is ambition and quality. I'm going to find the rest of my notes a bit there. So ambition and quality is broken down into understanding what others think, developing your work, and measuring your progress. So I think previously, in the previous format, we would drop in language like, we strive for excellence. This is going to be a high quality sharing, or, you know, it's going to be innovative, and different things that would kind of meet this idea that artists are reaching for ambition and quality. This is, you know, a good section to be able to go into that a bit more in depth and to really explain what you would have been talking about in terms of how you understand your own ambitions or the ambitions of your organisation, and again, some goals, some targets, some understanding of how to meet it. It's about understanding what others think. So really taking on board, you know, understanding what people think about the work, not just putting the work out into the world, really engaging with your peers, really engaging with the audience, really engaging with others on the team. Developing your work, again, there's some crossover there with other sections, but what new skills are you going to learn, or new things going to happen for your organisation? And then again, measuring your progress. That's where this is a real kind of evaluation side of things. How are you going to know if you've achieved these things? So for Jane, she's going to collect written feedback from all the partners, the venue, the community, creatives working on the project. She might write out here what she's looking to find out, maybe something specific about puppetry, or how her work was received by community participants. She will develop skills in financial management, working with venues, engaging communities, and leading a small creative team. Jane's going to define in this section that if 70% or more people would recommend her show or workshop to a friend, that is good. That's her ambition and that's her mark of quality. And she'll find that out through talking with them. Also, just having a work in progress showing is fundamentally for Jane about putting her ideas out there in the world, and then really honestly listening to the people that come to that and that are part of making it, to take some, so you might talk about some steps that she's going to take after that work in progress. But that's kind of all part of how she's making it. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. Let me just share again with you this screen so that it records my email address. For everybody that's come. So if you want to get in touch at all about anything to do with access support, if you think that you might qualify for access support, happy to chat that through with you. If you've got any questions that you want to talk through, they maybe don't want to talk through here, then drop me a line. Anything that I said that doesn't make sense, drop me a line from that. So would really, really love to hear from you. And I'm really glad that so many people came along and did that. We've probably got time for sort of 2 or 3 questions. If anyone wants to either unmute and just ask the question directly, or if you want to do that some other way in the chat, then now would be the time.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent, wonderful. So a lot of us I know are individual practitioners, or we're coming from very, very small companies. I'm coming from a digital arts magazine, which really just has 1 person running it and 1 volunteer at the moment. So subsidy would be transformative, both for the project, but also for the organisation overall. And I'm just wondering how, given that absolute focus on a particular project with a focused start and end and outcome, we can, sort of people like us, can navigate how transformative the subsidy would be just for the organisation, whilst also focusing on the project.
I think that is exactly the kind of application that they're always looking for, that they want to see the impact that it's going to have for the future. I think it's about really, again, it's understanding your aims as an organisation, describing how the project furthers those aims, and talking about how you're going to measure the progress of that. So it could be that the project is gosh, I don't know, something that is really similar to what you do day to day, or it could be something really left field, you know, bringing in new community groups to write different bits or whatever. But, you know, you've got to be really secure in that argument of, okay, well, here are our goals. These are the things that we're going to address, and that this is why the project reaches, like, attains them.
Thank you.
There's a couple come through in the chat. Would touring a show to priority places count towards the cultural community strand, or does it need to have more engagement in terms of workshops and similar? Yeah, I think that just that touring a show would, again, remember that the Arts Council have laid out that cultural activity equals social benefit, like that is how they're framing what you're doing, and you would then make an argument of why you were touring to those places. Is there something within the communities that will work? For example, rural touring, that's very much kind of led by people within the community, and they create other wraparound events and bring those communities together and provide, you know, kind of those experiences. So yeah, I don't think that you have to have active participation, active workshops to meet some of those strands and outcomes. Lydia's also asked a question in the chat. Is there a sense of how the word count has changed? Yes, that is absolutely in that comparison document. And you've asked me to share the link. It's in the slides that I will share with everybody. I'll send them back round to the mailing list and send them. But Lydia, if you want to email me, then I can send it directly to you. A personal question. Is Spun Glass Theatre entirely dependent on an Arts Council grant? Do you have a specified grants applier? What would you do if your grant was stopped? So we're not, we don't get regular subsidy. We're project to project basis. We're about 50% subsidised and about 50% earned income for this year anyway. So what we do is apply to project grants for different projects and different things, but we also have got funding from Awards for All, from different community foundations. So we try to have as varied a portfolio as possible. That has made us stronger. When we were just working on Arts Council project grants, it was very like boom and bust, and we would get 15 grand and then we spend it and go back to nothing and kind of have to start again. I apply for the grants mostly. I have teams that I work with and people that help capacity and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Sylvia. Great. 5 minutes for anyone else to ask any other questions. Eleanor Young has said, is this now for grants of up to 30,000? Yes, the shorter turnaround has now gone up to 30,000, but the decision time has been extended slightly to 8 weeks instead of 6 weeks, and then above 30,000 is still at the 12 weeks. But it just means, because yeah, I don't know about how everyone else is feeling, but it was starting to get really hard to get anything significant funded for £15,000. So that's really, really welcome. There's so much within this new format that is really, really welcome. And that, I think the kind of breaking down of this linear idea of talking about your project kind of start to finish, and setting goals and targets and ambitions is going to be really useful. There are some slightly different pots of funding that I haven't looked into massively within project grants, but there are specific funds now for touring, and there's specific funds, I think, for kind of things in certain places, that's worth having a look into if you're planning a touring application, whether you should go for this sort of shorter project grants or if you should go for the new touring fund. But yeah, just have a look through everything and see kind of what is relevant to you. Okay, I think we should wrap up there. Thank you so much, everybody. Oh, Maddie has just answered a question. Do you need to double what you're looking to achieve, or could you effectively put in for the previous? That's an interesting question, Maddie. I don't know, having not gone through loads of application processes, to be honest, but I would assume that, you know, it's a straight replacement. It's not about evidence, you know, loads more participation or loads more different things. You'd obviously need more match funding. So if you're going for 30,000, you'd need a minimum of £3,000 cash. That has come back because that was all relaxed over COVID. So that's come back from now. Yeah. All right. Thank you. This is the end, and look forward to talking with lots of you if you want to email me. Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye.